My mother always told me that marriage was about partnership, about sharing burdens and joys in equal measure. What she never mentioned was how those scales could tip so dramatically, leaving one person drowning while the other barely noticed the water rising. For 32 years, I believed Robert and I were balanced, until the day I found the notices. It was an ordinary Tuesday in April when I discovered them, tucked behind the old bread box in our kitchen, a hiding spot Robert had used since we bought our colonial-style home in Connecticut 27 years ago. 3 foreclosure warnings, 6 credit card statements with balances that made my stomach clench, and a letter from a collection agency I'd never heard of. The total, when I finally had the courage to add it all up at our kitchen table that smelled faintly of last night's pot roast, was $387,450. I remember touching my hair, the silver-white strands that had fully replaced my once auburn color around my 53rd birthday, and feeling suddenly every one of my 58 years. The kitchen window framed our backyard cherry tree in full bloom, pink petals falling like snow, oblivious to my world collapsing inside. "Elaine?" Robert's voice startled me. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame somehow smaller in that moment, shoulders hunched beneath his golf polo. "You weren't supposed to find those, clearly," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Were you planning to tell me before or after we lost the house?" The story unfolded like a tragic novel I couldn't stop reading. Bad investments, a failed side business, loans from people I'd never met. Gambling, that was the worst revelation, watching my husband of 3 decades crumble before me as he admitted to the nights at Mohegan Sun, while I thought he was working late. "I was going to fix it," he kept saying, pacing our kitchen, while the afternoon light cast long shadows across the hardwood floors we'd refinished together one summer. "My Uncle Philip is sick, terminal. He's leaving me everything. It's substantial, Elaine. We just need to hold on a little longer." I'd met Uncle Philip exactly twice in our marriage. A cantankerous bachelor who'd made millions in real estate along the eastern seaboard, he'd always treated Robert like a son. The inheritance was real, but the timing was a gamble neither of us could control. That night, I sat alone on our back porch, watching fireflies emerge in the growing darkness. Our neighbors' windows glowed with what I imagined were normal family dinners, normal conversations, normal lives untouched by financial catastrophe. The weight of decision pressed down on me like a physical thing. I had options. My career as a high school principal had given me a decent retirement account. There was the money my parents had left me, tucked away for real emergencies, and if this wasn't one, what was? I could leave Robert to his mess. I could walk away with half of whatever remained after the creditors took their share. Instead, I made a different choice. 3 days later, I sat across from our financial advisor, signing papers that liquidated nearly everything I had. My retirement fund, my inheritance, the small beach cottage in Rhode Island I'd bought with my first principal's bonus, all of it, converted to checks with other people's names on them. "Are you sure about this, Elaine?" Jim, our advisor, asked me with concern etching his face. "You don't have to do this. Legally, these are his debts, not yours." "I'm sure," I said, though the pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 32 years means something, for better or worse. I meant it. I didn't tell Robert immediately. Instead, I spent a week researching addiction counseling, financial planning services, and support groups. When I finally showed him the receipts, all the debts paid, our home secure, he wept like I'd never seen before, not even at his mother's funeral. "Why?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why would you do this after what I did?" The answer was both simple and impossibly complex. "Because I still love you, and because we're going to fix this together. But there are conditions. Those conditions became our new marriage contract. Complete transparency, counseling, both financial and for his gambling. A modest lifestyle within our means, which were now significantly reduced, and Robert would find work, despite having been semi-retired for the past 5 years. That spring became a season of reconstruction. Robert took a position managing a local hardware store, a humble job for a man who'd once run a department at an insurance company. But he embraced it with a determination that reminded me of the man I'd married. I continued as principal, postponing the retirement I'd planned for the following year. We sold our second car, canceled club memberships, and learned to live differently. Some friends drifted away when our social life changed. No more country club dinners or weekend trips. But others showed surprising loyalty, inviting us for home-cooked meals and walks along the river that cost nothing but offered everything. On warm evenings, Robert and I would sit on our porch swing, my white hair catching the sunset light as we talked more honestly than we had in years. Sometimes, between discussions of budgets and counseling insights, we'd find moments of unexpected joy, as though the stripping away of pretense had exposed something valuable we'd nearly lost. Uncle Philip called today, Robert mentioned one such evening in late August, his hand gentle on mine. He's being moved to hospice. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. This man's death would solve our remaining financial challenges, the rebuilding of our retirement, the security of our future. Yet I couldn't wish for it, not when I saw the genuine grief in my husband's eyes. We should visit him, I said simply. And so we drove to Massachusetts the following weekend, to a stately hospice facility overlooking the Atlantic. Uncle Philip was diminished in his hospital bed, his once commanding presence reduced to hollow cheeks and papery skin. Yet his eyes, so like Robert's, were sharp as ever. "So you're the woman who saved my nephew from himself," he said, when Robert stepped out to speak with a doctor. I startled. "He told you?" "Everything." Philip's laugh turned into a cough. "He always was terrible with money. His father was the same way, but you..." He pointed a gnarled finger at me. "You've got backbone." I didn't know what to say, so I simply held his frail hand until Robert returned. As we left, Philip called me back for a moment. "Thank you," he whispered, "for loving him better than he deserved." 3 weeks later, as autumn painted our neighborhood in russet and gold, we received the call that Philip had passed peacefully in his sleep. Robert grieved quietly, genuinely, without mention of the inheritance that would soon follow. I stood beside him at the funeral, my arm linked with his, my white hair visible beneath a simple black hat, as we listened to distant relatives and business associates praise a complicated man neither of us had truly known. The leaves fell around the cemetery in a gentle cascade, nature's reminder that endings always come, whether we're prepared or not. What none of us knew then was how those endings would lead to the most unexpected beginnings. The reading of the will took place in a wood-paneled law office in downtown Boston, where the air smelled of leather-bound books and expensive furniture polish. Robert and I sat side by side in uncomfortable chairs across from Philip's attorney, a precisely groomed woman named Eleanor Hargrove, who spoke with the efficiency of someone who valued her time highly. "Mr. and Mrs. Marshall, thank you for coming," she said, shuffling papers with manicured hands. "As you know, Philip Westfield's estate is substantial. The distribution is relatively straightforward." I squeezed Robert's hand, preparing for the relief this moment would bring. After 6 months of financial discipline, counseling sessions, and rebuilding trust between us, this inheritance would be the fresh start we needed. Not to return to our old lifestyle. We'd both agreed those days were behind us. But to secure our future, perhaps help our grandchildren with college, and finally plan the retirement we'd deferred. Eleanor adjusted her glasses. "The majority of Mr. Westfield's estate, including his real estate holdings, investment portfolio, and personal property valued at approximately $27 million, is bequeathed to..." She paused, looking directly at me. "Elaine Marshall." The room seemed to tilt. "I'm sorry. There must be a mistake," I said, feeling Robert stiffen beside me. "There's no mistake, Mrs. Marshall. Mr. Westfield was very specific." She slid a letter across the desk. "He left this for you as well." Robert's face had drained of color. "But I'm his nephew, his only living relative. Mr. Marshall, you haven't been excluded." Eleanor continued calmly. "You've been left the sum of $100,000, with the stipulation that it be used for continued counseling and education in financial management." I couldn't process what was happening. The letter sat untouched before me, while Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice tight. "Uncle Philip and I had an understanding." Eleanor's expression remained professionally neutral. "I can only execute the will as written, Mr. Marshall. Your uncle made these changes approximately 3 months ago, shortly after your visit to him in hospice. He was of sound mind, with 2 physicians and myself as witnesses. The drive home was silent, tension filling our car like a physical presence. Robert stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while I clutched the unopened letter and tried to make sense of what had happened. Our house, the home we'd nearly lost, then saved at the cost of my financial security, felt different when we returned, smaller somehow, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Robert went straight to his study and closed the door, leaving me alone in our kitchen with Philip's letter. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Dear Elaine, we spoke only briefly, but in that conversation, and in everything Robert has told me since, I recognized something rare: integrity. When faced with my nephew's failures, you chose compassion over abandonment, responsibility over resentment. Robert has always expected life to solve his problems. It's partly my fault. I indulged him, made him believe rescue would always come. In doing so, I failed him far more than I helped him. I'm breaking that cycle. By leaving my estate to you, I'm placing it in the hands of someone who understands the true value of money, not as a means of escape, but as a tool for security and growth. Use it wisely. Help Robert become the man he's capable of being, not the boy who waits for salvation, and perhaps find some joy for yourself along the way. You've earned it. With respect and gratitude, Philip Westfield. I sat at our kitchen table, watching the sunset paint our walls gold through the windows, the letter lying before me like a ticking bomb. Outside, our neighborhood continued its normal rhythm, children riding bikes, a neighbor walking her dog, the mail carrier delivering the day's final letters. Inside, my world had shifted on its axis. When Robert finally emerged from his study, his eyes were red-rimmed, but his voice was steady. "Let me see it," he said, nodding toward the letter. I handed it to him without a word, watching his expression as he read his uncle's final message. When he finished, he placed it carefully on the table between us. "He's right about me," Robert said finally. "I've always waited for rescue." "Robert." "No, let me finish. When I found myself in trouble, I counted on Uncle Philip's death to save me. Before that, I counted on bonuses, on market upturns, on lucky breaks. And when none of those came through, I counted on you." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "You were the only one who didn't fail me, and I nearly destroyed you for it." The grandfather clock in our hallway ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Through the window, I could see our cherry tree, now heavy with summer fruit instead of spring blossoms. "So what happens now?" I asked finally. "That depends on you," Robert said. "It's your inheritance." The word hung between us, weighted with implication. Your inheritance, not ours. The distinction wasn't lost on either of us. "I need time to think," I said, standing up. "This isn't a decision I can make tonight." That night, I slept in our guest room. The first time in our marriage I'd chosen to sleep apart from Robert, without one of us being ill. I lay awake, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, thinking about choice and consequence, about second chances, and whether some bridges, once damaged, could ever truly be repaired. The following weeks unfolded in a strange new reality. I met with Eleanor Hargrove and a team of financial advisors to begin the process of transferring Philip's assets. The scope of his estate was even more vast than we'd imagined. Properties along the East Coast, investments in technology companies I'd barely heard of, art collections stored in climate-controlled warehouses. Robert and I established an uneasy truce. He continued working at the hardware store, attending his counseling sessions, and maintaining the financial transparency we'd established. I continued as principal, delaying any decisions about the inheritance until I could fully comprehend what it meant for us. "You could leave, you know," Robert said one evening as we sat on opposite ends of our sofa, the television murmuring quietly in the background. "You have the means now. No one would blame you." The thought had occurred to me, the freedom to start over, to build a life untethered from the mistakes and betrayals of the past. Yet something held me back. "Is that what you want?" I asked. "Of course not," he said quickly. "But I'm trying to see this through your eyes. 32 years of marriage, and I nearly lost everything you worked for. Now you have more than either of us ever dreamed of, and it's entirely yours. The balance of power has completely shifted." Power. It wasn't a word we'd ever used to describe our relationship before. Yet he wasn't wrong. Something fundamental had changed between us, beyond the mere facts of our financial situation. Summer faded into autumn, and with the changing leaves came clarity. One crisp October morning, I woke early and drove to the small public beach near our home. The shoreline was deserted, just me and a few determined seagulls braving the cool wind off the water. I walked along the wet sand, my white hair whipping around my face, thinking about the day I'd met Robert at a friend's barbecue 35 years ago. The young man with the quick laugh and ambitious dreams who'd promised to build a beautiful life with me. The decades of ordinary days and quiet nights that had followed, raising our son, building our careers, weathering illnesses and celebrating triumphs. One mistake, even one as significant as his, couldn't erase those years. Yet neither could I simply pretend it hadn't happened, that we could return to who we'd been before. By the time I returned home, I knew what I needed to do. Robert was in the kitchen making coffee, surprise registering on his face at my wind-blown appearance. "I've made some decisions," I said, accepting the mug he offered. "About the inheritance." He nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm listening." "First, I'm establishing a trust for Jason and his family," I said, referring to our son who lived in Colorado with his wife and 2 children. "College funds for the grandkids, and enough for them to buy a house without the mortgage stress we had." Robert nodded again. "They deserve that." "Second, I'm donating a significant portion to education initiatives, scholarships for students at my school, funding for arts programs that keep losing their budgets." A small smile touched his lips. "That sounds like you." I took a deep breath. "Third, I'm creating a new foundation for financial literacy and gambling addiction recovery. I want you to run it." This caught him off guard. "Me?" "Elaine, after everything that happened, because of everything that happened," I interrupted. "Who better to understand the need? You've done the work these past months. You've faced your demons. Now you can help others face theirs." He was silent for a long moment, emotion working across his face. "And us? What about our marriage?" I set my coffee down and reached for his hand across the kitchen island. "I'm buying us a new house, something smaller, more manageable. The rest of the money goes into secure investments that will support us and the foundation. Joint accounts, full transparency, shared decisions. You'd still trust me with that, after everything?" I met his gaze steadily. "Trust has to be rebuilt, not just declared. We'll keep working on it, day by day. I'm choosing to believe in the man you're becoming, not just remembering the man who made those mistakes." Robert's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve you." "This isn't about deserving," I said softly. "It's about choosing. Every day we choose each other for better or worse. Some days are definitely worse. But we keep choosing." Later that evening, we sat on our porch swing watching the neighborhood children in their Halloween costumes, scurrying from house to house with plastic pumpkins and excited squeals. My white hair caught the porch light as Robert's arm rested around my shoulders, a familiar weight that felt both old and somehow new. "Uncle Philip was smarter than I gave him credit for," Robert murmured. "How so?" "He knew exactly what he was doing. If he'd left everything to me, I might never have changed. But leaving it to you," he looked down at me with a rueful smile. "He ensured it would be handled with wisdom." I thought about Philip's letter, about integrity and responsibility, about the lessons wrapped within his unexpected bequest. "Perhaps," I said, "he was giving us both a chance to find out who we really are when everything we thought we knew gets turned upside down." As night fell fully around our home, the home we would soon leave for a new beginning, I realized that inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about the values passed down, the lessons learned from others' mistakes as well as our own. Philip had left us far more than his fortune. He'd left us a chance to redefine ourselves, to build something stronger from the broken pieces of what came before. 1 year after Philip's bequest changed our lives, I stood at the podium in a renovated warehouse in downtown Hartford, staring out at the sea of faces gathered for the official launch of the Marshall Foundation for Financial Recovery. My silver-white hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, my navy blue suit a concession to formality, on a day that felt momentous, yet deeply personal. "Welcome," I began, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in my stomach. "Many of you know pieces of our story, the financial crisis that nearly destroyed our family, the unexpected inheritance that offered redemption, and the journey that brought us here today. From the front row, Robert watched me with pride evident in his eyes. At 61, I had found a confidence that my younger self could never have imagined. Forged through crisis, strengthened by difficult choices, what you may not know is that this foundation was born from both catastrophe and compassion. Sometimes our greatest failures can lead to our most meaningful contributions if we're brave enough to transform our pain into purpose. The past year had been one of profound transformation. We'd sold our colonial home and moved to a modern townhouse closer to the city. Smaller but filled with light, with lower maintenance costs, and no memories of financial deception embedded in its walls. The foundation occupied the first floor of this converted warehouse, with meeting rooms for support groups, offices for financial counselors, and a computer lab where people could learn budgeting skills and rebuild their credit. Robert had embraced his role with unexpected passion, working alongside addiction specialists to develop programs specifically for gambling recovery. His openness about his own struggles lent authenticity to the Foundation's mission, drawing people who might otherwise have been too ashamed to seek help. Today, we're not just opening doors, I continued, gesturing to the renovated space around us. We're opening conversations about money, about addiction, about the shame that keeps so many trapped in cycles of financial destruction. These are discussions our culture avoids, leaving people to struggle in isolation with problems that flourish in secrecy. In the audience sat Jason and his family, who had flown in from Colorado for the occasion. Our grandchildren, now secure in their college funds, watched with the innocent belief that grandparents were supposed to change the world. Beside them were colleagues from my school, friends who had stood by us during our darkest days, and several of Robert's fellow recovery group members. Everyone in this room knows someone, perhaps intimately, who has faced financial crisis. The statistics are staggering. Nearly 60% of Americans cannot cover an unexpected $1,000 expense. Gambling addiction affects millions, with an average debt of $40,000 by the time most seek help. I paused, making eye contact with various faces in the crowd. But we are not statistics. We are people with stories, with wounds, with the capacity for both terrible mistakes and remarkable healing. After my speech, as guests mingled over refreshments and toured the facility, I found a quiet moment in what had become my office, a modest space with large windows overlooking the river. The walls displayed framed photographs. Our son's family, Robert and me on our 30th anniversary, and a single picture of Philip Westfield that Robert had found among his uncle's possessions. "There you are," Robert said, appearing in the doorway. "The board members are asking for you. They're impressed, Elaine. We've already received 3 new grant offers." I smiled, noting how different he looked from the man who had sat across from me at our kitchen table confessing his financial sins 18 months ago. The haunted look had left his eyes, replaced by purpose. The counseling, the steady work, the foundation, all had contributed to his recovery, but most important had been the daily rebuilding of honesty between us, the slow restoration of trust. "I'll be right there," I promised. Just needed a moment. Robert crossed the room and took my hands in his. "Are you happy? With all of this? With us?" It was a question he asked periodically, as though checking the temperature of our reconstructed marriage. The answer had evolved over time. "I am," I said, and meant it. Not in the way I once imagined happiness, that carefree feeling of youth, but this deeper satisfaction, the knowledge that we've built something meaningful from our worst moments. "Yes, I'm happy." He nodded, understanding the nuance. Our relationship had matured beyond the binary of happy or unhappy into something more complex and ultimately more durable. "Uncle Philip would be proud," Robert said, glancing at the photograph. "Though he'd probably claim this was his plan all along." I laughed softly. Perhaps it was. He seemed to understand human nature better than we gave him credit for. As we rejoined the gathering, I was struck by how far we had come from that April day when I'd discovered the hidden notices. The journey had not been linear. There had been setbacks, arguments, moments when the weight of betrayal felt too heavy to bear. Yet we had persevered, not out of blind obligation to our marriage vows, but through active choice to build something new from the ashes of what had burned. The foundation quickly became more successful than we'd anticipated. By our second year of operation, We'd expanded to 3 locations across Connecticut, partnering with community colleges to offer financial education and with healthcare providers to create pathways for addiction treatment. I had finally retired from my position as principal, though I still mentored new administrators and occasionally guest lectured on educational leadership. Robert had found an unexpected talent for public speaking, his personal testimony about gambling addiction making him a sought-after voice at conferences and in media discussions about financial recovery. On quiet evenings in our new home, we would sometimes reflect on the strange path that had led us here, how close we had come to losing everything, how an unexpected bequest had offered not rescue but opportunity, how we had chosen to redefine ourselves in our 60s instead of settling into comfortable retirement. One such evening, as autumn painted the Connecticut River in shades of amber and gold visible from our balcony, Robert brought out a dusty photo album I hadn't seen in years. "Look what I found in the storage unit," he said, setting it between us on the outdoor sofa. Together, we turned pages that chronicled our earlier years, our wedding with my auburn hair piled high in 1980s fashion, Robert's proud stance beside the colonial house when we first purchased it, our son's graduation, vacations to places we'd saved years to visit. "We had a good life," Robert said softly. "Even before all this." I touched a photograph of us on our 25th anniversary, my hair just beginning to silver. "We did. And now we have a different good life." He was quiet for a moment, his finger tracing the outline of our younger selves. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found those notices? If my gambling had continued until we actually lost everything?" The question hung in the crisp evening air. It was one I'd considered many times during sleepless nights. I said carefully, "We would have lost more than our house and savings. We would have lost us." Robert nodded slowly. "I was so afraid when you found out. Not just of losing our home, but of losing you. I couldn't have blamed you for walking away." "Yet here we are," I said, closing the album and taking his hand. "Here we are," he echoed, "thanks to you. And oddly enough, thanks to Uncle Philip." The foundation continued to grow over the following years, expanding its mission to include financial education for high school students and specialized programs for seniors vulnerable to scams and predatory lending. My white hair became something of a trademark at financial literacy events, the wise elder sharing hard-won wisdom about money and relationships. On the 5th anniversary of the foundation's opening, we held a gala celebration at a downtown hotel. Hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by our programs gathered to share stories of recovery, of homes saved, of relationships mended through financial honesty. As I looked out at the crowd from my seat at the head table, I was struck by how tragedy had transformed into triumph, not just for Robert and me, but for the countless families represented in that room. Philip's inheritance had multiplied far beyond its monetary value, creating ripples of change that would continue long after we were gone. Later that evening, as Robert and I swayed gently to the live band playing standards from our youth, I rested my head against his shoulder. "I covered your debts," I murmured, "then inherited your inheritance." He pulled back slightly to look into my eyes. "What?" "It's just something I've thought about. How life takes these unexpected turns. I paid your debts never expecting anything in return. Certainly not millions from an uncle I barely knew." Robert smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening, "And I lost an inheritance I was counting on, only to gain something far more valuable." "Which was?" "The chance to become someone worthy of you," he said simply. "Someone who gives rather than takes, someone who faces problems instead of hiding them." As we continued dancing among couples young and old, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. There had been no magic moment of complete healing, no instant restoration of everything that had been damaged. Instead, there had been daily choices, small acts of courage, consistent efforts to rebuild what had been broken. In my early 60s, with silver white hair and wisdom earned through both joy and pain, I had discovered that second acts were possible, not just in careers or finances, but in marriage and purpose. The inheritance that had seemed like an ending was really a beginning, offering not just wealth, but the opportunity to define what truly mattered. What mattered, I had learned, was not what we accumulated, but what we built together. Not the mistakes we made, but how we mended them. not the crises we faced, but the compassion with which we faced them. And as the evening ended, and we made our way home under a canopy of stars, I felt a profound gratitude for the unexpected turns in our path, even the painful ones, that had led us here, to this moment of hard-won contentment, to this life we had rebuilt from the rubble of what came before.